In this video, we're going to get into some sophisticated reactions. So what we're going to do is set up a digital switchboard so that when forms come in of a certain type or events happen in the system, we want to find out which campus is relevant and find the relevant people and kind of assign them. So this is going to be pretty in-depth. It might be a fairly long tutorial, but let's get cracking on it. So on the left-hand side, a lot of people don't know this, but you can define pretty much anything in Fluoro. You can define events, define articles, define content, define images. You can also define realms. And so at this church, we actually have a definition of a realm called a location. And so if we open up this, we'll see we've got Brisbane City, Pine Rivers, Online, Launceston, Brisbane North, Adelaide, Townsville, and Brisbane West. So they're all locations. And on each of those locations, because we've defined, if we just edit the location definition, we've actually got a lead pastor, an adults coordinator, all of these different kind of reference fields where they can select who are the people for that location. Now, if we go back, we can go to Brisbane City, and in here we can see we've got a adults coordinator, a young adults coordinator, and so on and so forth, all of these people. And what we want to do is we're going to create a reaction which will listen for a certain form, and when the form comes in, we're going to assign it to a process and set up that one of these people, depending on a number of different things, are going to receive that email or be assigned that card. So to do this, we're going to click close. I'm just going to click the switch back to old admin in the top right, because at the time of recording this video, we don't have the reaction builder in the new admin panel. It's coming soon, but it's not there yet. So if I click switch back to the old admin panel, then in here we can go down to reactions, and here we can create a reaction called the hello form switchboard. Now if we go into here, I'm just going to go back and find my hello form, which I think will be, we'll just go back here and, where were we? Back to our forms list. And where are we? Forms over here. Go to forms, find our hello form. We'll go to the public link, and on our form, just going to click edit on this. We have a reference field that asks us to select one of those locations. That has the key of realms in here, and the idea is that when you fill in this form, you will have picked which location you're at, and then we're going to send the relevant details to whichever location pastor or coordinator makes sense. So if I fill in the form, I'm going to fill in Brisbane City here. I'm going to fill in CADE testing, plus testing at fluoro.io, 4718, and we'll go, what demographic are we in? I will be in young adults. I'm new and get my life to Jesus. Okay, so I'm going to hit submit. And now if I go back to my reaction, I should be able to click add a test, and I can choose the hello form over here, and we get a whole bunch of information about that form. Now this data object will give us stuff that we can use, but it's often a good idea to set up our trigger for our reaction to have as little information as possible. So it'll likely come through with an ID of this, and we can add, test email and phone number and all that kind of stuff for our test. We click done, and that's going to be our test that we're going to use to build our reaction. Now the other thing that we need to do is click permission sets, and we also want to say that we have full access to pretty much everything, because otherwise our reaction might not be able to load things and we'll wonder what happened. We're going to turn off the active triggers here because we don't want this reaction to be listening to anything. We're actually going to push forms into it. And here we can click add action, We're probably going to add a few different actions, so we'll just hit save on that. And the first action we're going to do is click and select Populate Content Ids. And we want to populate the item, so we're going to press enter on the item. And what that means is over here, this is a key of item, and we've got a few bits of information, like we know the ID of it, and we know that it's a hello form, but we want to actually load the whole form. So we're saying populate that and give us all of the information. And we can be specific about which bits of information we actually care about if we want to, but we can just leave that blank as well. So I'm going to hit save, and if I hit the run test, then you'll see that the input into this step comes through with a little bit of information. But then when we populate it, the next step has a whole bunch more information. So now what we want to do is we're going to write some JavaScript code. I'm going to click select action and run some custom code. Now the way that this works is you need to return a done function with two arguments, either an error if something went wrong, or our output. And we can create a variable at the top here equals input, because input's going to be what this object is that comes in. And then we can do all of our fancy stuff in here before we return the output. And the output is what's going to get sent to the next stage. So if we run this, what we'll expect to see is basically exactly what we saw here. This comes in, we populate the item, we've got the input, then we return the output, and it comes out into the input of the next step. Now if we wanted to, we could write output equals hello, something like that, hit save, and hit run test, and you'll see that, hey, now that's our output over here, which is, that's what it is there. So that's not what we want to do. Now we're going to write our switch statement, and we want to find a few different things. So first off, what we want to do is we've populated the item, and that's great. Now what we want to do is populate, we'll click the plus in here and add another step in between. We want to populate the content IDs of the item.realms. Now, it might be hard to see in here, but this item will have realms just here, and that's going to be the ID of our realm, which I chose Brisbane City. If I hit run tests, realms now has a whole bunch of information, including the title, what else have we got there? The follow-up director, the campus pastor, all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't need all of that information, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write, we care about the title, and we care about the data object, which is where all the juicy stuff is from our definition. I'm going to run this, and now we've got, where is it? Realms just has all of the coordinators, IDs, and all of that kind of stuff there. And we can also, just for clarity's sake here, I'm just going to add another custom code bit here, and we'll just copy this, and I'm going to clean this up a bit so that we're just going to not have all of the information. All we really need is the realm, or let's call it location, because that's what it is. Now I like to use Lodash, which is a really handy library, so we can write underscore equals require Lodash. This is a JavaScript tool that just makes working with big arrays and data sets really helpful. Location equals, we're going to get our input.item, which is our form submission, and then in here we're going to go, I want the realms 0, which is going to be the first realm, which is the one that we populated just before. And I also want to get the raw data of what the person typed in, which is the input.item.raw data. Now the reason why I'm using the underscore get function is we could, for say this raw data, we could just write input.item.raw data like that. But sometimes you may want to go, we want to get the input.item.raw data.something else. And JavaScript will break if there's any missing part in the chain, whereas what the Lodash underscore get function does nicely is it lets us add, really deep nested paths, and it won't break, it will just return nothing if it doesn't exist. But what we want to do pretty much is, instead of returning output like this, we just want to return the location and the raw data. And if we hit save and we run this, it means our next thing over here, we've got our location, which has the bits and pieces that we actually want, and it has the raw data there, which is the form submission. So yeah, there we go. That's good there. So we've got our contact and we've got our things that we've chosen. And we could do this all in one custom code, but obviously what I've done here just cleans it up a little bit so it's a bit easier for us to read for this tutorial. What I'm going to do now is add a switch statement. This is just JavaScript, so I'm going to go, all right, we get our input dot, what do we want to do? We want to get the demographic, and we're going to use Lodash again for this because it's just going to be very helpful. I'm going to go get our input, and we want, from what I can tell, raw data. Actually, what we might do is just make this raw data dot contact, because that's where all the information is there, and we'll just call this our contact. Stick our contact. Now I'm just doing this because there is only one kind of field with all of the fields inside it there, whereas you probably want to use raw data if you're trying to copy this, because raw data will be all of the fields on your form. You might have more fields than this hello form. But basically I'm going to go, I'm just going to pass through the location and the contact. So if we run this again, we're not going to actually have a raw data key. We're actually going to have a location and contact. Again, just makes it a little bit easier. So I want to get the contact dot, whatever the key of that was, which is what demographic are you in, and then we'll call it decision. Can be okay, my life to Jesus, and no more can be this one over here. And then what we want to do is go, we'll do some JavaScript and add a switch statement, which is what I was trying to do before. Switch on the demographic. And here we're going to go case is young adult. Break. And the case is, I'm not actually sure what all of the different options are, so I might have to go back to this form. We'll just click what demographic are you in. Okay, so we've got adult, young adult, and youth. So what we'll do is adult here, young adult, and youth. Okay, cool. And we can, in a switch statement, we can add a default if they haven't provided any of those things, so we can decide what we want to do. Now, what we're going to do is our output. I might, instead of doing this input, output equals input thing, we might just create our own object just to be nice and clean. So we're just going to create a new object, and then we're going to do fancy stuff with it here by going if you're an adult, do this. If you're yeah, whatever. And the other thing I just realized is that we actually don't want the raw data. We actually want the submitted data there. So the raw data is what they input, so this is all their answers, but we actually want the data.contact, because what the data is once the form comes in, that raw data actually gets transformed into a, let's just load it in here, it actually gets converted in and saved as a contact or matched with a contact in the database, and we're going to need that contact ID soon. So I'm just going to change these keys to be submitted, and our contact is actually this guy, this ID. Now the reason why we want that is because we're going to add him to a process depending on, you know, whatever is picked. Now the location up here, I think what we're going to do is we're going to find, we'll create a people or assignees equals an array. Now, if the person has selected a demographic of young adults, we're going to want to say assignees equals, we use our underscore get, we'll get our input dot location, So to input using the get function, location.data. Is it young adults coordinator in there? And if it's youth, we want it to be this youth pastor here. And if it's kids, I don't think we've got an option for kids, but maybe we could do something else. The campus pastor, a follow-up director. I think that's the person that we're looking for. So this may change after this video when I actually get some instructions about what I've done wrong, but that should be like that. So now what we're going to say is, okay, switch on the demographic, and it's going to say, okay, well, they picked this demographic, so the assignees should be this. And for all other assignees, what we'll do is we'll just find the follow-up director, I guess. Pass it there. So then we're going to export the output there, and our output should include our contacts, which is going to be input.contacts. And if we run this now, you'll see we've got our contacts, and we haven't actually got our assignees, and the reason is because we're creating the object before we actually put the assignees in, and we want to put the assignees in our output object, just like this. And then we run this, and you'll see, hey, here's our assignees of who we want to assign to, and here's our contacts. Now, I am going to have to refer over to our processes over here and just see what processes we have, because we're going to say that if they're a Brisbane City new person follow-up, I believe this is the case, but probably what we can do is, if we're going to have a different follow-up for each location, we might go to our locations over here, and we will edit our location, and we will add a basic field, and we'll say follow-up process. And over here we can say a content reference. The reference will actually be a definition, and the definition, I guess someone can pick which definition. It's going to have one, and we're going to hit save over here. And if we go back to our locations, we find Brisbane City. When we edit this, it's going to ask us what is the follow-up process. So here I can find it. Now I haven't been specific about it being a process, just a definition, so we'll just go parent type is one of a process. And we're going to choose, I think, the Brisbane City follow-up process like that. We're going to hit save. Now, if we go back to our reaction and we populate this again, we should actually in our data object have the follow-up process ID there. So what we'll do is we'll input, our output will actually have the say target process, let's say, and up here we can get our target process equals get input submitted it's input dot location dot data dot follow-up process, like that. And that should be this ID here. If we run, we've got our target process. So far we've got all the bits and pieces we need. We need the assignees of who we're assigning to. We've got the contacts that we're going to add to a process, and we've got the target process also. Now, it's just coming to me now as well that we may actually want the submission ID, which is basically our input.item.id. We can pass that through over here as well, which is the form they filled out. Because you can add a person to a process, you can also add a form submission to a process, which is usually more helpful because the form submission asks you really relevant questions, whereas just having a person to a process, you often don't get that. But here we have all of the different pieces that we could need. We've got the assignees, we've got the contact, we've got the target process, we've got the submission, and then here what we want to do is we want to go add to process, and we can start linking all of these IDs. So the target array we don't need. We want the keys, target item keys, is the things we're going to add. Now we can choose either to be the contact, because that's a person that can be added to the process, or we can choose submission. I'm going to choose submission because it's probably going to be better, because you'll get actually the form submission gets added to the right place. Then we're going to choose the processes, and we've got an option where we can actually select a process, but from this aspect what we want is we know the target process ID up here, so we're going to put it in the process ID keys, and that's actually wrong. I actually need to put in, what's that called, target process. So it's going to look for a key of target process on the input here and go, oh, that's the key, because each time someone fills in, it's going to be different. And then we want to go assign to contacts from keys, and this is going to be our assignees. So just down here, we need to type in assignees and hit enter. And then we can do other things like add extra fields and some other advanced stuff, but that's pretty much all we need to do right now. And that's our switchboard. So it's going to basically go through and do a bunch of different things and then decide which process to add to, and who to assign to and things like that. But what we need to do is go back to our form. It's going to find our hello form. Going to open that up. And we want to click form configuration, scroll down, and basically say that our form, when it's submitted, is actually going to go into that reaction pipeline. So if we click find, we can find our hello form switchboard, and then we hit save. And what that means is when someone fills in this form, once it's finished, it's going to go into that reaction, and that reaction here is it's basically going to come in here, do all of these steps, and then finish off. So we're almost there.
Let's give it a bell.
So let's give it a bell. I'm going to click the Brisbane City. We'll add in Roger Ramjet, rogerramjet.com. Put in a phone number. What demographic is he in? He can be in young adults. Tick these, hit submit, and our form's gone through. Let's go back to our process over here, and Roger Ramjet's in there, and he's been assigned to Anton, who is the young adults coordinator at Brisbane City, and that's how it all works.